Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another great episode of Crushing Strongholds. This is a podcast where we turn pain into power, trauma into triumph, and a place where we get to expose the lies of the enemy. And how do we do that? We do that through sharing testimonies of people who have actually walked through and crushed strongholds of their own. And today I have an amazing guest that's going to come on. And I have to say, I can resonate so much with this lady that I think this is going to be a wonderful conversation. I know that you all will enjoy it, and I know that we're going to get so much out of it. Um, my guest today, she is a certified life coach with specializes in helping loved ones of addicts. And she also navigates through the chaos, the shame, the grief, and often that comes with addiction. But not only does she life coach in this, she's also lived this, which is what I love about Crushing Strongholds is because always behind the mask, there's always a story, and she gets to share that today. She gets to share how she overcame and battled and now is rising up. And I love that because her actual website is called Rise. Now that I just thought about that, there was no pun intended there, but there
That was on purpose. Yeah.
I was like, wait, that's the name of her website. That is so cool. But she did. She rise up. So let's welcome in Jennifer Chase. So thank you, Jennifer, for and welcome to Crushing Strongholds.
Oh, I'm so grateful to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to get to talk to you and like I said, in the intro that is a lot that we resonate with and as far as a lot of likeness and I do have some couple questions, but why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself before I just dive in and start dissecting everything.
Yeah, so for me, it starts as a very young child. I am a product of addiction. So about four generations down my mom's side and about four generations down my dad's side, sort of danced in the disease, mostly of alcoholism. So I had a grandma that was an opiate addict in the 50s before that was kind of a thing to be. But for the most part, my family sort of danced in the disease of addiction. And the roles that everybody took. Most of the women were the enablers, the rescuers, and the men were the alcoholics. And that was true for me with my dad. My dad was an alcoholic. I have two older siblings. And what I can say is really when I was a child, it felt as though they really liked to hang out with one another, but I was always the odd man out. I was always the little sister. I was always the one that I didn't necessarily feel like they liked me too much. And my mom, I don't know if any of you guys can relate to this, but I have a mom that if she spoke English, I spoke German, right? We have never a day in our lives felt the same, had the same emotions. We don't communicate the same. And so there was a common denominator to all of these sort of relationships in my home, and that common denominator was me, right? Like I was the problem. I was the one that, like, if I could just be a little something else, something other than what I was, then these relationships would be easier. And unfortunately, I'm also part of a statistic that says one out of every three little girl and one out of every six little boy that's sort of raised in that dynamic is being sexually abused. And I was being sexually abused by my mom's dad. Again, there's a common denominator, right? And so I remember at the age of four, the first time that I barricaded that little girl into her bedroom with all of her record players and stuffed animals. Like at the age of four is when I started learning that isolation was the safest place for me. Like if I could just keep the outside world from getting into me, I was going to be okay. And, I think that the interesting thing about my family was from the outside looking in, I had a blessed childhood, right? I grew up upper middle class. I had was afforded a lot of opportunities that some people hadn't, weren't given in their life. And so people looking into my family thought it was perfect, but that was not what it felt like in the inside, right? And that made it even more confusing. And if my mom wasn't my person, my dad was. Like I loved him, but he was again was an alcoholic, and so the inconsistency of his behavior I took on as a me problem. Um, and I think, growing up, you and I talked about it a little bit before we hit the record button. Like I was never going to be like the adults in my life. Like I believed that there inability to break the chains of addiction as 100% weakness. Like I had more courage in my pinky finger than they had in their whole bodies. Like that's, I wouldn't have been able to tell you, was I going to go to college? Was I going to be a wife? Was I going to be a mom? Like I wouldn't have been able to share any of that with you, but I would have been able to tell you, I am not going to become an alcoholic. Like I knew that. I knew I had the biology. I knew all of the things, and that was never going to be me. And unfortunately, January 2003, I was diagnosed with a hemorrhaging brain tumor and given about 12 hours to live. And when they removed that brain tumor, they caused nerve damage in my head. And so that led me on my path to chronic pain, which also led me on my path to opiates. And the 14-year journey of an opiate addiction. Um, and I became everything I said I wasn't going to be. When I got sick, my kids were 2 and 5. When I got sober, they were 18 and 21. And my kids lived every bit of the traumatic childhood. I mean, they weren't being sexually abused by any means, but they were being raised by somebody in active addiction, just like I was, and just like my parents had been. And I became every bit who I wasn't and didn't want to be. And through that journey, when my son was a senior in high school, I found out that I had inadvertently become my son's drug dealer. And he had also chosen opiates as a solution to his trauma and his mental health and some of those other experiences that he had as a child. So, I think my story is one of how this generational trauma thing happens, right? Even with the intention of it not happening, but not only how we pass it on to generations, but then we even with the what felt like an intentional effort to not have my children live this life, I passed the baton on, if you will, of addiction with my child. And getting sober, the truth is, dealing with the shame of that has been a journey. And I'm not a smoke blower, right? I don't blow smoke up anybody's, what. And I've been sober for almost 9 years, and there are still days when I wake up and just feel the weight of that tremendous amount of shame that I have. So, addiction has for sure been a journey that I unfortunately have been able to experience, lots of different perspectives of.
One thing I can say, well, I can say a lot to that. Thank you for sharing that, by the way, and being very transparent with your testimony there. I think that again, looking back on when we say to ourselves, we're not going to ever do that. We're not going to live that lifestyle. We're no, we're seeing it with our own eyes,
Yeah.
something that we don't want for ourselves, and yet we end up going down that path anyway. And the shame is really horrible. I mean, I can relate with that because I felt the same way. And like I said with, my story a little bit, it's just that it was after my divorce before I started drinking. I never drank. I never, I was good in high school. I was, trying to be this kid that, actually made it through and graduated high school because my parent or my mom anyway, or I don't know my dad, but she didn't make it past the ninth grade. So I was trying to, make goals for myself that because I wanted to do something better. And I also wanted to make her proud of me, you know.
Mhm.
And even though, even in her addiction, it just never was going to measure up and be enough. She would always just tell me, you're never going to be good enough. And it was just so hard. And I'm like, I'm going to show you, I'm going to show you, I'm going to show you, but
Yeah.
it's devastating, And then when I had my own kids, I remember how protective I was. And to where I was almost like a crazed monkey because I was like, don't look at my kids. Because I was like you, I was abused by my mom's dad. And
Mhm.
so I didn't want, my kids to be around certain people and certain things and somebody look at my kid cross-eyed or in a weird manner and I'm about to rip their head off. I was just kind of like a crazed monkey with it because I was so scared of it happening to my own kids. And then I was the one, like you said, I was the one who passed the baton to them. And it's just like, man, it is a generational problem. We don't even
Yeah.
realize that it's attached to us. And there is spiritual and warfare that goes along with that biblically that
Yeah.
says that these things are attached to us from birth. From literally from us being born, we are born with that attachment on us. And until we recognize it, we can't get rid of it. We have to break that. We have to break the curse. And
When I,
so,
and I think
Go ahead.
One of the things that you're talking about that I think is so important for listeners to hear, if they have been, this generational trauma piece, and you spoke about it, and this is definitely part of my story, is because I felt so woefully underprotected as a child and had so much trauma around that, and that's where my worth came from, or lack thereof, and my not feeling valued because I didn't feel protected. I swung that pendulum so far over to the other direction. And and because I swung the pendulum to the other side, my children never had to learn how to do anything hard. I had every conversation with them, right? I didn't give them coping skills on how to deal with difficult situations or disappointment or failures or whatever else, because my worth was now attached to whether my children were protected or not, right? I was going to be better than my parents were. That was the only goal. And so, but what happened was I created just as much trauma
Hmm.
on the other side of the pendulum as my parents did on the other side, right? So my children were overprotected and I was underprotected. And what you're talking about is healing comes when I choose to do the healing and become balanced, right? But in generations where we've experienced this, we just generationally go from one spectrum to the other, right? So let's say you grew up as like my child where you were overprotected. You're like, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing helicopter mom. That was awful for me. I had the worst experience. And then we underprotect. And then the underprotect generation overprotects. And that is how we continue to contribute to this sort of generational one of the reasons, right? We've got biology, we've got a lot of things
Yes.
that happen generationally, but I do think that that's one of the things that oftentimes as mom we don't understand until hindsight. We don't understand until we've reached the point where it's like we did some harm and we need to look to see where that harm stemmed from, and we realize it was because we didn't have any balance.
Yeah. One thing I've always said is, unfortunately, our children, not one of them came with a handbook.
Yeah.
And, and neither did we, and so our parents did what they did, and us as parents, we're going to do what we do. And unfortunately, we carry that baggage with us. And sometimes that baggage gets dumped onto our children, and then they have to carry it, and sometimes, that's where a lot of our shame also comes from, I think, is because we know we've dumped some of our trash on them, and now we're trying to pick the trash back up. We're trying to pick it up and we're trying to recover from it because we feel so bad. And I've had really deep conversations. I'm really close with my children, and they've seen me just be on this yo-yo, from but my childhood, they also know my childhood was like a yo-yo. I was in and out of foster home since I was 2. I wasn't ever wanted most of my life, and then when I was wanted, it was out of convenience. So and then it wasn't protected wanted. I wasn't protected at all. I had to protect myself. I was protecting my mom from her boyfriends that were abusing her, and trying not to get abused myself by my mom being married 6 times, and it's just radical. It was just crazy. And so people will say, "Well, I don't know how you turned out so good." Well, I don't take credit for any of that. I think that I had my kids, and I think my kids are the reason I turned out the way I did. But it took them being adults and having a
Yeah.
voice for themselves, and me being willing to listen to their side of the story and not just my own. And that changed me. And them going, you know what, Mom, this is what happened. This is what we went through when you were going through this. And man, did that open me up. And man, did it hurt. It stung so bad. I remember that pain of just going, man, I'm so sorry. I did not realize that this is what I was doing to you. I never wanted, and they knew how much I loved them. So they knew that it wasn't an intentional type of hurt or pain. But I made mistakes, as that parent, as that, like you said, that overprotective parent. I had to unleash them and let them live. Like you said, you have to give them, you have to find that balance. And they actually, it's crazy. It's funny, even though I raised them, um, it was almost like when they turned adults, they were turning around and raising me back. It was so weird. And I was like, oh my gosh, but you guys are so smart. How did you guys get smart? Oh yeah, because I raised you. No, we would say that to each other. It'd be kind of funny. I mean, my daughter one time gave me dating advice because I was running down the same path as my mom. just trying to find validation in men, and seeking, love in all the wrong places, And so she was like, Mom, you're going to find something wrong with everyone that you meet. Can't you just pick someone? Because I was being so picky, and she's like, everyone has issues, but your standards are too high. And I said, my standards are high because I'm trying to be protective. And he's like, yeah, but you won't let nobody get close to you. And she was a teenager when she told me that. And I was like, oh my gosh, I need therapy. I need counseling. What's going on here? You're not supposed to be teaching me. I'm supposed to be teaching you at 17.
Yeah.
And it was like I said, again, the eye opener. But I loved her for her honesty. And I've always taught my kids, you be open and you be honest with people. You don't have to sugarcoat stuff. And I've never been a sugarcoater on anything. And so I think that's something that's really helped our relationship. But I always felt that trauma was, um, I always thought, man, do they really, can they really forgive the stupid mistakes I've made? And I know that they have because they show so much tremendous love that I'm just blessed. I really am blessed, and I'm thankful for that. But I know there are people out there that that we want to reach today. That's what you're doing. Your coaching program is trying to reach those people that they're sitting in the shame. They're sitting in the disappointment and the lack thereof of, nobody's going to understand where I'm coming from, but actually people do understand. I
Yeah.
understand. When you tell your story, it's like, man, I can relate 100% with every word you're saying. And so when you're doing your coaching, what do you find is the hardest um, part to tackle? And I don't want to give away all your coaching skills because I want people, if they need coaching, I want them to call you and get some help. So don't give away all your perks, but like when we're coaching people, we want to, say, hey, sign up, come see me, I'll help you. But I want to also um, direct people towards you because what you're doing is amazing. I can tell just by talking to you that you're very helpful with people. What is the one specific thing that you find that is the hardest for people in our situation to face?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think it's that the realization that I didn't cause my loved one's addiction, right? Like I mean, I definitely I'm not talking about myself. I'm talking about other people, right? Like I didn't cause my son to be an addict, but the realization that I think is the hardest is that I have contributed to the length of it. I have this dynamic, this dance floor, if you will, in our family. The way our family dances has contributed in some ways to this addiction. And this is the thing. And I believe you probably understand this. Like substance has never been the problem. Substance is not the problem. It is not the problem. It is the solution to the problem. And it oftentimes for those of us that choose it, it's the only coping skill we know, right? It's the only one that gives us the relief of pain, if you will, from this thing called trauma or experiences or whatever. But the truth is, one of the, I've met a lot of addicts. I worked in the field for 6 years in the recovery field and in the trenches with addicts themselves. And I would say 9.5 out of 10 addicts that I've ever met will tell you that they felt like a square peg in a round hole in that family dance floor, right? And what they're trying to say to us is that we feel like the authentic version of us is not lovable, that you need me to be this ideal version of myself in order to be on this dance floor with you, in order to be loved, liked, seen, valued. It feels as though I can't be my authentic self. And as a family, we've got to look at that. I've got to be really honest with myself as a mom. And I can be like, there were versions of times in my son's life that I absolutely wanted him to be round. And I wanted him to be round because that was what I thought the way society would view me,
Mhm.
right? Uh, I had less fear when he was around, right? I didn't have to worry about his well-being as much or whatever the scenario was. It was about me. I wanted him to be round. And as we heal from this thing of addiction, like this dance floor has to change. We all have to be able to be our authentic versions and find real trust and rapport in that way in order for us to heal. Now, as an addict, I tell loved ones all the time, like, I had one of two options when I got sober. I either get on this same old dance floor that we've had all of these years, but I'm going to be high because that's the only way I can do it. Or I'm going to have to get off all the way. Unless, as a whole, we sit together and figure out what dance that we can create together that we can all be the authentic part. And I think that's the hardest part for families is oftentimes they're like, I'm not changing. I'm not the one with the problem. And the mindset is flawed, right? I'm sure you've heard that, this is a family disease and it affects everybody. And because it affects everybody, the change is going to have to come from everybody. And that's not to say that we are to blame for somebody's addiction, but if we really want peace, if we really want transcendence, if we really want to heal from this thing, we've got to look at how our participation to this dance has affected the dance as a whole.
Mhm. Wow, that's crazy. Because I agree with that exact comment, that thinking that that's how we all have to mesh together in order to survive.
Yeah.
And I think it's really sad that um, along this journey, when we go through it from either the physical or the sexual abuse, the drugs, the alcoholism, um, from LSD to heroin to alcohol, I've seen so much that it just blows my mind, and it blew my mind even as a little girl. I would give nosebleeds when I'd watch traumatic things happen. My nose would just start bleeding because I'd be freaking out.
Yeah.
And my brother used to be like, "Get away from the window and quit watching everything." But I couldn't stop watching. It was like a murder scene. You had to watch it on TV. But it was my life. That was my life I was living. It was in front of me as my family. And I just remember how traumatic it was, and how when I was trying to help my mom later on in life, when we started developing a relationship, was after I graduated high school. Because then she didn't have to take care of me. She just wasn't a mom that could take care of children per se. If you were an adult, she got along with you just fine, because you could take care of yourself. She didn't have to be responsible, and she
Mhm.
didn't want the responsibility. So when we were trying to get along and stuff, it was great and honky dory until I told her that she needed to quit drinking, because it was such it wasn't just a once in a while drink. It had to be a party every single night. It couldn't just be, hey, have a glass of wine or have a cocktail with dinner. It had to be the whole neighborhood was over. And so I was like, we're getting too old for this. And when my oldest daughter was born, I said, you can talk to her, you can see her, but you're not allowed to touch her if you have one drop of alcohol on you, even one drop. And boy, did that cause a ruckus in our lives. She got so mad at me. She didn't talk to me for like 3 months. And I mean, but you know what she did? She quit. It made her
Mhm.
quit. And she quit, well, I thought she quit cold turkey. Come to find out, she ended up going to a rehab. I didn't find out till after she passed away, when I was going through her lockbox, that she
Mhm.
had went to rehab, but she did it secretly because she didn't want people to, she was ashamed that she
Mhm.
had to go get help. She didn't want people to know, I have to get help. I can't do this on my own. And I wish she would have told me that she couldn't do it on her own, because I would have loved to help her do it, been there with her to help her get through it.
Mhm.
Because I think we do that. We isolate, like you said, we go in our room, in our dark place, because we don't think anybody is going to be willing to or able to help us or want to help us. And we're in it for ourselves. We have to figure it out all on our own.
Mhm.
And that part made me sad after my mom had passed away, and I realized that she had went to rehab all by herself. I was still really proud of her for doing it, because she did quit. But I just thought, man, what a lonely time in her life that must have been, feeling so alone that nobody was there to help her, you know. And I don't know which program she went into. Like I said, I was just out of high school, and so I was just shocked. But it was overwhelming. And I know that what happens is we lose our identity in who we really are, with the things that are said to us, the things that are done to us, the things that we do to ourselves because of the things that are said and done to us. It is a cycle,
Yeah.
and we think this is the norm. And it's really not the norm. We just think it's the norm.
Yeah.
It's just what we're supposed to get adjusted to. Like, you know, deal with it. This is the way it is. This is life. And we want to tell everybody, oh, this is what's acceptable in society. This is how we have to be accepted into society, like you were saying before. And there's so much truth behind all of that, because we don't stand up and be who we are, who God actually gave us the rights to be. He assigned us with our own self identity. And we don't stand up to that because of somewhere down the line in our life, we were told that we had to be this way instead of that way. or we
Yeah.
had to do this instead of that, or you're better off at this and not so good at that. And they take parts of your identity, and then you get to a point where you don't know who you are until you go through that. Like you said, I loved what you were talking about in your profile, how you had to surrender all of it. Once you
Yeah.
surrendered all of it, that's when the peace came. And
Yeah.
then you were able to finally start building and recognizing who you are as a person. Who am I? Who is Jennifer? Who am I? And it's
Yeah.
like, I want to be me. I don't want to be who the world tells me to be. And I
Mhm.
used to be the same way. I used to try to please everybody because it just seemed to be more peaceful that way. If I was pleasing everybody, then I didn't have to worry about any conflict. I hated conflict because I had it my whole entire life. And I think we run from those things instead of facing them head on and standing up for who God made us to be. And that's why I love Crushing Strongholds, because I decided, instead of trying to partner with everyone else in the world, I partnered with God. And I was
Mhm.
like, you know what, God, I need you on my side because I'm trying to do this alone. And so, with that being said, what in your again, we're talking about coaching a little bit too, but in your life, where did the spiritual, where did God come into your story? Tell us
Yeah.
about that.
So I walked into an inpatient facility the day after my son graduated from high school, and the goal in that was, how do I save my son, right? Like, how do I stop being his drug dealer? How do I get so many drugs out of the house? Like, I wasn't interested in sobriety or recovery or transcendence or like that wasn't it. I was just trying to figure out how to like use like a gentle lady. And I walked into this inpatient facility. It was a locked down behavioral hospital that had like an addiction wing, right? Not the most glamorous of situations. They would come in every 15 minutes while you're sleeping with a flashlight to make sure that you were still alive and hadn't harmed yourself. Like it was a lot, right? But it's interesting to me looking back, it is where God met me. Like I have clients now that are like sending their kids to Malibu, and I'm like, it's great, but I'm telling you, God met me in this lockdown mental institution, right? And what happened in that place is I started learning that the opposite of my addiction was connection. Like connection had been what I was yearning for my entire life. And never felt it really, right? Always felt like the outsider, the old man, the one who was not loved for her authentic self. Like I had to be something else in order to be loved. And I'm in this facility with these other people that are addicts, right? That understand my shame and understand what I've experienced and often had the same experiences. And I started building this connection. And there was a gentleman there who had relapsed from an outpatient program and had said, "Hey, do you guys want to come to this outpatient program when we get out?" And at the time I wasn't working, I was on disability, and I was like, I have nothing else going on, right? And I wanted more of this connection. So I went to this outpatient facility that happened to be a faith-based facility. I actually ended up working for them for 6 years. I was part of the executive team there and believed very strongly in what we did. But um, this place being faith-based, the beautiful thing about it was, I think oftentimes those of us that have experienced significant trauma, and I can just speak for myself, I believed that God felt about me the same way everybody else felt about me, which is you're just not that lovable, right? If you had been lovable, I would have saved you from your childhood. I would have, right? Like whatever the messages that I told myself, I believed that I had no connection. And I was raised fairly religious, I would say. We went to church a lot. I went through First Communion and I had the understanding of what religion was, right? It wasn't something that we didn't experience. But I didn't have that connection.
Mhm.
I didn't feel a kinship. I didn't feel a relationship. And when I went to this outpatient program, um, it was an opportunity for me to put my big toe in the pond of what does this mean for me? Like, not what it meant for my parents and not what they tried to teach me growing up, right? But what does this act, how do I feel? How do I believe? And that experience was one of the most beautiful experiences I've ever been through in my life. And I can tell you today that the only reason I have been able to be sober for nine years, the only reason I have, you know, had the opportunity to stand before others and hopefully impact them moving forward is because of this relationship that I have. And it is so deeply personal to me now. And one of the reasons I work with families is, again, I worked at this facility and loved, I mean, the people that work there are my people. I feel very strongly about what they're doing. But there was this pull that I started to have, which is, Jennifer, I did not lead you through every single one of these aspects of your life, whether it is the granddaughter of an alcoholic or the alcoholic, your dad, or the relationship with your mom, or walking through this addiction yourself, or the experience that you've had with your son. Like, I didn't walk you through all of that to not help family members. Like, that's why we did this, right? And so it became this pull that I couldn't deny anymore, and really feel like it was my purpose and God's direction for me to work with the family. And I think the important thing for me, I was sitting in my office one day when I worked at that facility, and somebody said to me, Jennifer, if you could have one of two things, but you can't have them both, you have to choose. You can have the perfect childhood. You got everything that you needed. Your mom was fantastic. Your dad was not an alcoholic. Your grandfather didn't abuse you. Your siblings loved you. You can have that life, or you can have the life that you have today. And without question, without pause, I would choose the life that I have today,
Mhm.
right? And in that moment, I realized that God didn't leave me. God didn't abandon me when I was a small child. He did not have, like, my grandfather had free will, my dad had free will. Like, those things happened to me. But he had so much, he knew the whole time, Jennifer, I'm going to stand right here and we're going to go through this, and you're going to have an opportunity one day that you're going to use all of this for good.
Mhm.
You're going to help my children. You're going to do the work. Like, you're going to use these experiences. It's going to make sense to you one day. And I'm going to stand right here as we walk through this. And I know it's going to be hard. There are going to be days where you don't think you're going to wake up the next morning. There's going to be days where you try not to wake up the next morning. But if you can just have this experience and this courage, I promise you, I'm going to use every single bit of this for good. And for me now, that is the only thing that makes sense.
Mhm.
It's the only thing that makes sense of my childhood. It's the only, and it's the way that I have been able to forgive on such a deep spiritual level. Like, I will never forget, as long as I live, the day that I forgave my grandfather.
Mhm.
And not, I think, sometimes people get forgiveness wrong. It's not like, if he were alive today, I want to break bread with him. It's not like I, want to be his best friend. Like, that's not the kind of forgiveness I'm talking about. The forgiveness I'm talking about is this spiritual understanding that even though he did what he did, well, and let me just preface this, my grandfather was a twin. And both of those men abused children. So you have to make an assumption, right? You have to connect the dots that they were probably also abused. Um, and I look at sort of the generation, the trauma generationally in my family, and I mean this, and this might sound crazy to some people, but I feel, with God's help, that every generation before me did the very best that they knew how to do with what they were given.
Mhm.
It wasn't enough, and it fell incredibly short. But that doesn't change that I do believe that they did the very best that they could. And that has allowed, some healing inside of me that am I impacted by it every day?
Yeah.
Right? Like, every day I deal with something that my sexual abuse has changed inside of me. Like, I was changed who I was the first time that happened to me, right? But the forgiveness is, for me, what has created that sort of peace. And I could not even begin to do that without my relationship with God.
Right. Wow, that's wonderful. I mean, everything you just said. There's so much power behind that testimony right there. I want to touch on a couple of things. Um, again, kind of back to, what you said that you think that our families did the best they could. Like I said, like we don't come with handbooks, they're not equipped. But here's the thing is in all honesty, we end up becoming equipped because God equips us in the end. And we just don't realize that sometimes what he's putting us through is what it takes for us to become equipped
Yeah.
and getting that knowledge and that know-how. And I find that as God is equipping us, like I call it, is like um, we sometimes we look back and we think, God, why did you allow this to happen in my life? Why did you make me endure this? Why, the why? And I can totally relate with what you said because I used to think that I didn't matter to God either. I
Mhm.
used to say, why did you even make me if I wasn't going to be good enough for you? I used to say that to God. And I was saved at 10 years old, but I didn't have any discipleship at 10. I didn't get discipled until, later in life. But um, I didn't even know that I had to have a relationship with Jesus Christ. I didn't understand there was some personal,
Yeah.
aspects to it because there was nothing personal in
Yeah.
my religious upbringing that was shown to me.
Yeah.
In my walk with my family, my friend, everyone around me. I did have a foster grandma that I was really close with. Had been taking care of her for 6 years. She's the one who I told you just passed away. She was my foster grandma since I was two. She's the one who I had probably the deepest relationship out of anybody I've ever met in my entire life. And she would teach me things, but she was real stern. And she would say, you know what? You can't be mad. You just have to love them. And I'd be like, I don't really want to love them. And she'd say, too bad, get over it. And, one time she sat me down. She said, you can be mad at your mom all you want because I really struggled with that. I hated my mom for a long time. And I said, I don't know what to do about this. And she said, well, you know what? You can be mad at your mom all you want. The Bible doesn't say you have to like it, it just says you have to honor and love her. And I said, I don't want to do either one of those things. She was like, too bad, get over it. That's what the Bible says you have to do. And I was like trying to eat those words. And I was like, and then learning to forgive. Like my grandfather, I loved what you said about the forgiveness, about your grandfather, because same, if my grandfather was here, we would not be going out to lunch together. That is just
Yeah.
something that would not happen. Um, I remember I didn't forgive my grandfather until after he passed away. So I didn't verbally go up and tell him I forgave him.
Mhm.
I did tell my mom that I forgave him, but I knew that he had also hurt my mom. And it took my mom until 3 years before she passed away to finally admit it that he had been abusing her, had abused her very badly. And I knew it because of the abuse that he had done to me and by the behaviors that she had that came with it.
Mhm.
And it was recognizable. And I thought, man, I wonder how recognizable my behavior is to what's happened to me. Oh my goodness. And I can only imagine what people saw, and I'm like, oh man, probably made a fool of myself more than once or twice. But I remember sitting at my mom's feet and talking to her about it, and she opened up and shared her story, and I was like, oh my gosh, mom, I knew, but I didn't know all of it.
Yeah.
And I felt like that day she finally was able to let go of some things, because she actually was able to talk about some things that she could never talk about before with anybody else. She had a large family. There's, I think, 8 or 9 of them in the family, and they didn't talk about stuff like that. They just endured whatever came along they took. Like they said, they felt like their parents did the best they could. I felt like my mom, for what my mom went through, I felt like she did the best that she could. And I actually honored her when she would put me in foster homes because she knew she couldn't take care of me and she
Yeah.
wanted someone to take care of me. You know, I like it? No, I hated it. I wanted my mom, but I didn't want my mom. It was such a yo-yo situation growing up. Like I loved her and I hated her at the same time. People are like, how do you have that emotion? I'm like, I can't explain it. It's just the way it is, you know. Because when you're wanted and you're wanted, but you're not wanted at the same time, it puts you in that state of mind,
Yeah.
and you have to overcome it. So I feel like with people that are facing addictions, um, I know that, my mom drank a lot. And I mean, I was drunk. The first time I got drunk, I was 16 months old, and my mom thought it was funny. And it was an accident, of course, but she shouldn't have left a drink sitting on the table and she shouldn't have made it taste so darn good. And I climbed up and I drank the whole thing. She found me rolling under the table and I was drunk. And, everybody laughed and they thought it was funny. And my nickname was Boozer. And when I was 12 years old to go get baptized, the pastor asked my mom, why do you call your daughter Boozer? And that's when she changed it to Boo because she thought, I better not call her that no more because my little drunken child. And I mean, I was
Yeah.
titled my little drunken child. And I kept thinking, I don't want to be an alcoholic. I don't want to be a boozer. Why you keep calling me a boozer? And then, of course, as I got older, everyone called me Boo. But which they still do. It kind of is like, okay, whatever. I'm 54 now, but only some people can get away with it. But in the end, you have to think about it, and you have to just go, you know what? It's the best that she could do. And even though she's gone now, and she's been gone 7 years, I miss her. I miss her terribly. But we used to fight like cats and dogs. It was just like everybody would be, everybody would be like, "How are you guys living together? Like how?" And I have such an such a deep amount of love for my mom that people can't even fathom it for what she's put me through. People in my life are like, how do you even begin to love her with what you've been through? And I said, it's not about what I've been through. It's about who we became. And
Mhm.
they're like, wow, how did you get over that? And I said, well, it was God. For one, if it wasn't for God, I'd still be sitting in that pit right now. And for two, the forgiveness and the surrendering all, and the accepting it. And the other thing I wanted to point out to you that you mentioned in your profile is when you're talking about the honesty. I feel like sometimes the reason we can't get over or through our addictions is because we're not 100% honest with ourselves. And it's always, let's blame somebody else and not take the responsibility of our own actions. We want to take that victim mentality and be like, but I'm a victim of this. This is why I'm acting this way. And we don't want to be 100% transparent, honest. And I think that's where it begins, is once you realize that you have to be honest with yourself, that's when the healing and the transformation can start. Do you agree with that? What do you think on those lines?
No, I do. And as I'm listening to you, for me, and even maybe before that, so even more before I could be honest about, because I had similar experiences as you have had about sitting in counseling offices with my children, right? And them being very honest about their experience of what it was like to be raised by my husband and I, and specifically me, because I was the one with the addiction, right? And that's hard. Some of the hard, and still have conversations occasionally like that if something comes up that's triggering them, or a conversation that, authentically has happened. It's still hard. But my experience with being able to start being honest with myself started only after I could forgive other people for their lack of perfection. I could only start forgiving my own lack of protection or perfection when I started forgiving other people for their lack of protection or perfection. Because this is the thing. I believed that perfection was required. It was required of me and it was required of somebody else in order to be liked, loved, seen, appreciated, and valued, right? And of course, perfection is impossible. So I always fell short. And therefore, that's why I wasn't loved, seen, appreciated, valued, right? Was because of my lack of perfection. And I still held myself to that until I started giving other people grace, until I started forgiving my mom and my dad, and saying things like, I do believe they did the very best with what they were given. My father was 19 million times the father that his father was, right? And if I had to give myself that same forgiveness, like the same grace that I was giving my father, I had to give it to him first, and then I allowed it for myself because I held myself to a higher standard. And once I started giving myself that grace, that is when I could sit in the truth. I could sit that the fact that this wasn't perfect and I made a lot of mistakes. I could sit in that because all of a sudden it didn't mean that I wasn't lovable.
Hmm.
Because as long as I thought that if I told you the truth, that meant I was an absolute piece of you know what, nobody was going to like me, nobody was going to value me. As long as I kept that mindset, I could never be truthful about it. I was always trying to put a mask on, project something that I wasn't. And also when I started, and when I kind of happened all at the same time, when I started giving myself that grace is when my relationship with God really was starting to transcend my life. Because if you think that God does not make mistakes,
Hmm.
but you are a mistake, there is some
Hmm.
cognitive dissonance in that.
Yeah.
Right? He
Hmm.
doesn't make mistake with anybody, but he made a mistake with me. There's some cognitive dissonance in that, right? And so I in when I started forgiving other people and looking at it from that mindset, it's like, oh, well, maybe he didn't mess up on me either. Maybe perfection is not what he is requiring of me.
Right.
Maybe, right? And I agree with you. There has to be honesty. We have to take the masks off. If we are going to transcend addiction, we have, and it's not even it's a great thing to do. We have to take the masks off and start becoming okay in our lack of perfection.
Exactly. I think, when we talk about that, the perfection part of it, I think about, the scripture says there is no perfection other than Jesus. So
Yeah.
unless you're trying to be exactly like Jesus, which is not a tough thing to try to even try to do. You could try all you want, guys. You can try it, but you're not
Yeah.
going to succeed at it. Um, God doesn't expect the perfection. He just wants our heart. He just wants us to feel the love and the joy and the grace and the mercy that he bestows upon us, even when we don't deserve it. Just like what we have to bestow upon someone else that doesn't deserve it. And like when you said about the forgiveness, my grandfather was dead, and I remember thinking, oh man, it's too late to forgive him because he already died. And then I thought, but I never forgave him. So what do I do? And again, I went to my grandmother, who was the wisdom in my life. And I said, what do I do? And she said, just forgive him. I said, but
Yeah.
he's dead. And she said, well, too bad. Forgive me. Like she always she's
But
really
that's
quick. Just
but
forgive him.
that's the
It's okay.
but that's the thing. So my grandfather was also passed when I went through that process. And this is the thing. Before I forgave him, he controlled almost every thought that I had, every decision that I made, every relationship, the way that a relationship danced, right? He had the purse strings too. And he had been gone for decades,
Mm,
right? And so that moment of forgiveness, yes, it was for him, and yes, but mostly it was just a pair of scissors that cut all of those ties and all of the control that he still had over my life and my mindset and the way that I thought about things and relationships. Really, for me, it was that moment to set that free.
mm,
Like set me free, set him free. Like you no longer get to control my every thought, my every decision, my every relationship. And and that was decades after he had passed,
mm.
right? And so there is, I believe, still this need, if you will, to have that and it was a wrestling. Like I'm not gonna lie, like there was a lot of
Mhm.
conversations I had with God that I'm like, he's got no business being forgiven. Like I can't even believe that this was put on my heart, right? Like how dare you even suggest that this is a me problem?
It's
Right? How
Yeah.
dare you suggest that I'm the one that has to do this, right? Like there was some wrestling that happened. Um, but ultimately, that forgiveness was more about me than it was about him. And that healing was more about me than it was about him.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think it doesn't matter if they're gone. It doesn't matter if they live next door. Like this process is about freeing yourself. And in that moment of freeing yourself, to open yourself up to even more of a connection with God.
Yeah. I think that, like like you even wrote that when you're taking that, you have to take that pain and you have to turn it into that purpose. And that's how you're doing it. That's part of that. Those are the steps in doing that, by the way. It, exactly. And what I love about like the crushing strongholds, I always say, turn your pain into power. I think the next step is once you've gained your purpose, then you can start demonstrating the power that comes with it because you've been freed from it. And until you get that freedom, you're just going to sit and wallow in it. I wallowed. I
Yeah.
wallowed in my grief and my pit. My pit was beautiful. It was blinged out. I mean, I had it perfect. It was comfortable. I invited people in it. Yeah, I lived in it for years. And I allowed myself to stay stuck in that stupid pit for so long and letting the enemy and letting all of the, like all those conversations about my grandfather stay with me and all of the other past hurts I had from the other abuse that I'd had in my life. I just hung on to all of that.
Yeah.
And I had, like you said, I had these. I cried and I yelled and I manifested all this anger and frustration because I wanted to punch somebody in the throat. I just really wanted to just let all my frustration out.
Yeah.
And, it's just like, when you're having a tantrum, you just really want to let it, really have that release. And sometimes you have to do that in order to get it. You just have to allow that to happen. You have to allow for that process. It's okay for the freeing to
Yeah.
happen. Now, of course, when you're 54 years old, it doesn't look really good if you're throwing yourself on the floor. I mean, you can if you want. I don't really recommend. There's ways of
52,
having a
so
tantrum,
it probably doesn't look good for me either.
but I mean, you could shut the door and have your little powwow and kick your feet and all that. It's okay. I mean, it is okay. But sometimes we have to just do things the way that we need to do them to get through them. But um, I think, like mentioned, the first part is recognizing how honest and dishonest we are with ourselves, how much we're harboring, how much we sometimes we only get rid of a little bit, and we think that's the healing, but we
Yeah.
don't surrender all of it. And what I've learned more than anything with doing this podcast is the amount of people that said, until I surrendered all
Yeah.
of it, I did not get free from it.
Yeah.
It still was connected to me somewhere. So I like the illustration, and I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to borrow it. But when you said all those strings that you were cutting,
Yeah.
so imagine, this is especially for our listeners, imagine you have all of these attachments. And if you're
Mhm.
only going to clip one or two of those attachments, you're still attached to it.
Still
If you don't
attached.
clip them all, every single one of them, you're not surrendering all. You're kind of like compartmentalizing, like, I'm going to keep this over here and I'm going to keep this over here. But then you're going to wonder why it's resurfacing. Why is the pain still happening? Why is the trauma still there? Why am I feeling this anxiety, this depression? What is this? What's happening? And it's that trigger that happens. We get triggered because you're still connected to it. You're not disassociated from it anymore. You're hanging on to it. You're
Yeah.
hanging on like that's your lifeline. The only lifeline we should have is Jesus Christ. That's what we should be hanging on to, and
Yeah.
let everything else take its place. It can go away to the wayside. Take that garbage truck and dump it at the trash.
Yeah,
So I love that illustration.
I'm a quote girl. You see back here if you're watching us. And one of the quotes that just reminds me so much about what you're talking about is by Joseph Campbell. And the quote is, "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek." And for me, I'm a person that I think in stories, I think in pictures. And for me, it's, we have all of this trauma, but inside of this cave is so scary, right? There's bats and stalagmites and dark and, all the things inside of this cave. And it wasn't until I had created this relationship with my higher power that I had enough courage to walk inside of this cave. I was never going to find the treasure, right? I spent an entire life crawling over these rock climbs, if you will, and being like, where's this treasure that y'all speak about? Like, why can't I find it, right? I felt like I was unworthy of it or dumb, right? Whatever it was, I couldn't find this treasure. And it wasn't until I started to have enough faith and enough trust in this thing that I called God to be able to walk inside of this cave and think that I was going to survive the innermost belly of this cave and the things that were in it, right? My own shame from what I did as an addict to my children and my family, the shame of my childhood, the relationships, all of it was inside of this thing. And it wasn't until I had that faith that I was able to go and walk in and go, no, look, I know this is not going to be the best time of my life. I know this isn't going to be fun, right? And one of the things that I learned through the recovery process is that I cannot go in this thing by myself. I need my people. I need my like-minded other alcoholics and addicts that understand what it's like to be in this brain and how I've used this coping skill. I need them to come inside of this cave with me. And I need us to all just sit down and for me to do this work. And then the beautiful thing is we're going to get up and we're going to go in their cave
Hmm.
and I'm going to go sit with them while they do it. And that's the thing about so many of us is like we want this treasure, but we're not going in that cave to get it,
Right. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We think somehow we deserve this treasure without having to go inside of the cave. I deserve it to be out here because of all these hard things that I've been through in my life. I deserve it to be on the outside of this thing and not have to go inside. And that's not the way it works. And the treasure is the most beautiful, um, I mean, like joy and peace and worth and love and value and all the things, right? It's the greatest gift I've ever been given, but it doesn't come at no cost.
Mhm.
And it takes some faith in order to get there.
Yeah, that reminds me of a quick little story I'll share real quick as we start to wrap up. And you probably have heard about it. It's either a meme or a little story. I seen it a while ago, but where a donkey falls in the well and the owner's looking way down in the well and he's like, "Oh man, I can't get this donkey out. I don't have a rope long enough. I don't have enough manpower." So he just starts, he's like, I'm just gonna bury him alive and starts burying him. He's throwing dirt on top of the donkey. Well, the donkey had such a will to live that every time he threw dirt down, he just put it under his feet. And until he got to the top and he walked out. And I think that that's what we have to do sometimes. We really need to be in those positions where the dirt is getting thrown at us, but it's still the only way that we can get out. We have to face that trial,
Well,
and
and I think
take it head
even
on.
more, the dirt becomes your greatest asset. That to
Hmm.
me is what, like, we have to be able to take what has happened to us and the experiences that we've had in this life. It's like two sides of the same coin,
Yeah,
right? Another quote that I love is by Viktor Frankl, which is, "What is to give light must endure burning." And that's what you're talking about, right? Like, I'm being buried alive, and yet I am using the dirt as the greatest asset that I have been given.
right.
And the question is, what are you going to do with the burn?
Yeah.
Because even this light that's on me right now is burning, right? Like and those of us that suffer with addiction that have been through significant trauma in our life, we have burned more than most, which means the light that we have the potential of giving is more than most.
That's so good. That is
And
such a good word.
so the question is, what are you going to do with the dirt that's being flung on top of you today? Are you going to let it bury you, or are you going to use it in order to get out of this well?
Yeah. It's like, are you just gonna sit? I mean, if the donkey would have just sat down, the donkey would have died.
If
You
the
know,
donkey would have said, "Oh, well, I'm just like, what am I going to do?